Ladies and gentlemen, we now go live from Reem military base in southern Israel, where preparations are underway at an Israeli military base for detainee Edan Alexandar's arrival. Hamas has announced Alexandar's release following U.S. communications and mediator efforts aimed at securing a ceasefire and facilitating aid delivery to Gaza. Hamas group emphasized that responsible negotiations led to the release of prisoners, while continued aggression only prolongs suffering and death. The group has expressed its readiness to begin ceasefire talks, withdraw occupation forces, end the blockade, and exchange prisoners. Earlier, United States President Donald Trump said that last U.S.-Israeli citizen held by Hamas, Edan Alexandar, is expected to be released in about 2 hours. Speaking at a press conference, Trump expressed joy at the news, saying Alexander is coming home to his parents, and added, "I thought he was dead." Hamas is set to release Edan Alexandar, the 21-year-old Israeli soldier with U.S. citizenship, as part of the ongoing efforts to secure a permanent ceasefire with Israel. The group said it has been in contact with the U.S. administration in recent days and described the release as part of broader steps to open crossings and allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. Alexander is believed to be the last surviving American detainee in Gaza. His release has been called a gesture of goodwill by Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, who is leading American involvement in the ceasefire negotiation. The U.S. President Donald Trump has labeled live from Cairo, we are joined by Dr. Mohammed Osman, the International Relations Specialist. Dr. Osman, thank you for joining us here on Qnews. Sir, what are the chances of a peace deal between Israel and Hamas being reached in the coming weeks in light of the release of Edan Alexandar, the last American citizenship holder by Hamas?
Thank you for having me, Hani. It seems we are witnessing a very significant breakthrough with regards to the war in Gaza. And of course, the breakthrough is not that some detainee is being released. This is not something new. However, the breakthrough is that this release has materialized after a direct bilateral agreement between Hamas and the United States. That's the first time the United States and Hamas have conducted a successful negotiation without the involvement even of the mediators, and that also excluded Israel entirely. So it seems that Hamas has offered Trump a gesture of goodwill before his tour in the region, in the Middle East. And it seems that the United States will reciprocate by pressuring Israel to allow more humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, and even possibly proposing some sort of framework to reach a long-term ceasefire and a wider detainee exchange agreement. However, I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that would say that the war is imminent or that a comprehensive ceasefire agreement or settlement is imminent, as some would suggest. Far from it. So far, we have not seen the United States actually exercise the maximum amount of pressure needed to push Israel to engage in actual de-escalation schemes so far. If anything, the United States did not even abandon its proposal for the Gaza settlement, which entailed the so-called voluntary relocation an act of forced displacement. So we haven't seen so far yet the release of Edan Alexandar today and the agreement that has been reached between the United States and Hamas is indicative that we are in a better place than we were a few days ago. We are closer, definitely, even if we are still far away, but we are definitely closer to a peaceful settlement than we were yesterday. And it's also indicative, I suppose, some sort of pressure on Israel in order to make them more lenient and more flexible with regards to their negotiating position, which has been very stringent over the past few weeks and has obstructed any meaningful efforts by the mediators, Egypt, Qatar, and the United States, to a lesser extent, of course, to reach a sustainable settlement in Gaza.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Osman, Hamas's decision to release the American detainee from Gaza without any conditions was largely credited to the mediation efforts by Egypt, Qatar, and the US. Now, what sort of pressure or influence were countries such as Egypt, Qatar, and the US able to sway Hamas to decide on to make such a decision without any conditions?
It seems that Egypt and Qatar have communicated to Hamas the true situation on the ground, and of course, with regards to the position of the United States, I think that the mediators, I'm only speculating here, that explained to Hamas the mindset of President Trump and how to deal with him. President Trump is not someone you would try to play a game of arm twisting with during a negotiation. He is someone who understands goodwill gestures and overtures, which he will be more than willing to reciprocate if it is granted to him. So I think this was a pivotal role played by the mediators to explain to Hamas that they have to be more flexible and realistic, and their conditions and demands should correspond to the realities on the ground in the battlefield. And not to speak as if they are the victors and that they are have triumphed and that they are in control of things, or that things are going in their favor, because they aren't, because they are not in control, because of Gaza is in shambles and the people are being exterminated and starved to death and bombed into oblivion. So this is hardly a successful result or something that you might call a triumph. And I think Hamas now is becoming way more level-headed, way more realistic in their correspondence, and even way more mature than the Israelis are. And I think this will be a tactical win for the Palestinian resistance on the short term that should be capitalized upon by the Palestinians and by the Arabs in order to push for a more comprehensive settlement in Gaza.
So, do you think that with the release of Edan Alexandar, it could be followed by the release of the rest of the detainees by Hamas and shift U.S. policy towards a more aggressive push for ceasefire negotiations? Or are we being too optimistic and hopeful, or could this actually happen?
I think being extremely optimistic or way too optimistic, but this exaggerated optimism does have some grounds. Because, of course, we cannot predict what measures President Trump might take, but all we know is that the relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu is strained. To what extent is this fallout between them? How deep is it? To what extent it will be effective? Of course, that cannot be measured or assessed at the moment. However, there is a condition where there is tension between the two principal allies. And the United States, of course, has the upper hand, so we can assume that there is a distinct possibility that they might adopt a much more aggressive stance with regards to trying to push Israel to be more flexible.
Dr. Osman,
to be more flexible. However, if they fail, if the Israelis decide to be more stringent, they might face the consequences of the lack of flexibility by diminished American support. However, I would never imagine a scenario where the United States and Israel will undergo a process of divorce. I don't think that's applicable. I think that the United States will always have Israel's back. However, they might apply more pressure in order to try to reach a ceasefire and a long-term ceasefire. And what indicates that is what Steve Witkoff said. Steve Witkoff said that we are very interested in a long-term ceasefire, 70 days long, I think. That was the proposal, in exchange for the release of 10 Israeli detainees and, of course, the launching of serious negotiations for a more sustained ceasefire and the release of all the detainees. And he said that we cannot achieve that because Israel wants to continue the war. So he laid the blame for the first time on Israel. So we might see pressure. However, we can only wait and see, Hani, whether this will actually materialize on the ground as meaningful pressure or just lip service to give the illusion to his Arab host that he is doing something before he visits the region, especially that he will garner a lot of money from this visit.
Yes. Well, as you've mentioned, it is coinciding with his visit to the Gulf. So is it possible for Trump to announce a final ceasefire in Gaza from the Gulf, which would actually bode well with the GCC countries and might be in favor of more economic deals taking place?
I think if he already had convinced Israel to adhere to a ceasefire, he might announce that, but that does not seem to be the case. What I expect is that he will present a comprehensive vision for the settlement in Gaza that will be more reasonable than his previous propositions. His previous propositions were borderline mad. Now he might present something that is more reasonable. It might not meet the standard of the Egyptian mediators or the Arab mediators in general or the international community, especially that we already have an Egyptian Arab Islamic plan of reconstruction without displacement in place that has been endorsed by the international community. But I do not see why it should not be just endorsed by Trump. What's actually happening is that Trump and the United States refuse to adopt or accept this plan as the way forward. However, if they have something else in mind that they would have to present, anything they would present will be better than previous propositions presented by the Israelis and the Americans. So he might present something during the summit that he will pressure Israel in order to accept, and that will also make him curry favor with the Arab Gulf countries that are hosting him, namely Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. However, I do not think that any economic investment by the Gulf states in the United States or any economic cooperation or economic packages of investment that the Gulf will present to the United States will never be conditioned with the situation in Gaza, because basically the strategic relationship between the Gulf and the United States goes way beyond the Palestinian issue, unfortunately. However, of course, I do believe they do have some tools of pressure, very subtle and benign pressure, and they are applying this very soft pressure on Trump, and it seems to be yielding some results. So overall, I think we will see a positive development during Trump's Middle East tour, or at least that's what I hope.
From Cairo, that was Dr. Mohammed Osman, the International Relations Specialist. Thank you very much, Dr. Osman, for joining us. And still from Cairo, we are now joined by Dr. Ayman Al-Raqib, the Political Science Professor. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Raqib. Now, what do you make of Hamas's unconditional release of the American detainee, Edan Alexandar, a strategic move or a goodwill gesture? How do you read it?
After greetings to you all, certainly this is a smart step by Hamas. During around March, there were continued negotiations led by the U.S. envoy, along with the desire from Hamas to release the last American detainees on October the 7th. And the talks was about that within a full deal, but the Israelis step back and while Hamas has already agreed to release Edan Alexandar, that has been handed over to the Red Cross, and I think it is a very smart step that throw the ball in the Israelis and Americans' court to conclude the deal. As the media channels on Witkoff's statement, the U.S. envoy to the Middle East, that the mediators exerted daunting efforts by US, Egypt, and Qatar in reaching the deal, but what disrupted the deal was the Israelis. It's a great progress, despite the reporters indicated the two delegations, one to Cairo and one to Qatar, to complete the deals about the swap detainees.
Doctor, how realistic or feasible is a near-term peace agreement between Israel and Hamas, given the current diplomatic efforts and the release of, he is a U.S. Citizen holder, but also an Israeli soldier?
I think that we might see a truce soon, but it isn't the end of the war. Hamas and all the factions realize that the only card they have of the war, which is the detainees, their numbers are alive, according to our estimations, from 20 to 30, and by yet the estimates by Israelis and the Americans are only 20. So regardless of this, Hamas has announced in a statement issued this morning, along with the release of Edan, that most importantly to end the war in. And I think this is a very important vision that to agree to withdraw from the political landscape. And it's also the matter is linked to other matters, and so Israelis also are requested to provide measures. And if we see that the Israelis announces that for the settler to give them the right for annexing settlement, which is and a serious development that would have some sort of more pessimism and signals negatively. So it is required now to end the war in Gaza, and then we'll talk about the other issues. Most importantly, that the mediations should be succeeded. Up till now, all the efforts are exerted positively, and as I indicated, that we're closer to truce that we might see in the following days, particularly that this truce would take place during Trump's visit to the region.
Sir, do you think Hamas's detainee release, it could prompt the U.S. to intensify its role in brokering a ceasefire, taking a bigger role in the mediation efforts, trying to use more tool pressures to influence the Israeli stance?
Certainly. The U.S. would consider that this is an opportunity to move forward at a larger scale, and would exert all the efforts, frankly, the presence of that pressured the Israeli side, and also the arrivals of Bulvar in the same time. So there are efforts exerted by U.S. side. Based on the information that the American side wishes for the presence of President Trump in the region, to proceed officially to announce a temporary truce. So there are attempts to achieve a political solution. Surely the Israelis are the obstacles, but the Americans are the only players that can pressure Israel. And within Israel, already the far right is disrupting all of these matters. But if the US wishes not to stay still, so they have to pressure Israel, and as I so. And as I said, it is not only for it's a matter of swap of detainees, but the main goal is to end the war.
Dr. Raqib, could Trump leverage his Gulf visit to declare or facilitate a lasting ceasefire in Gaza, in a way win more bonus points among the Middle East and the Arab world and Gulf countries as well?
The Gulf countries demand, frankly, to have some sort of a deal and follow into the establishment of the Palestinian state, and the far right categorically reject this idea. And Netanyahu already said this, and the Gulf countries wishes to have an advanced stance in this matter, but we no fear to provide the idea of the war in return of the occupying to annex more territories, which is seriously would affect the cause. But we should ask from the Arab countries to talk about a Palestinian state with clear features. So all the countries wishes for the political solutions and for the interest for the American to propose a political project. As the Arab already agreed upon the disarming the group and to establish the Palestinian state, and agreed in the amendment of the borders of this state. So the Arab countries were very positive in responding to these proposals, but the only obstacle is the Israeli occupation.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Raqib, do you think that the release of Edan Alexandar would actually put more pressure on the Israeli cabinet by the family members of the rest of the 58 Israeli detainees, because they would want the release of all of them as well, same way it happened with Edan Alexandar?
Certainly, they have the right to demand to release their beloved ones. But up till now, when the movement in the Israeli street is quite limited. Up till this point, demonstrations are limited, but I've already followed the Israeli media through statement by the families of the Israeli detainees by saying for releasing your detainees, they should have dual nationals. So for as already dead with releasing the other nationals, such as French and Americans. Also, we've seen another statement from the leftist Israeli camp, considering that Netanyahu is already abandoned them, and for the first time, they took for the first time to release the Israeli detainees, even if the price is political. And I think if we have followed peace conferences that realized that voices are falling in the assassination of Rabin and others are talking about establishing peace with Palestine. But if there's such movement to contain pressure mechanism on the coalition of the far right wingers would have nothing. That should include the mechanism of the pressure such as civil disobedience. And and so, and I think, as I said before, this should be presented on the table.
From Cairo, that was Dr. Ayman Al-Raqib, the political science professor. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, Hamas is set to release Edan Alexandar, the 21-year-old Israeli soldier with U.S. citizenship, as part of ongoing efforts to secure a permanent ceasefire with Israel. The group said it has been in contact with the U.S. administration in recent days and described the release as part of a broader step to open crossings and allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. Alexander is believed to be the last surviving American detainee in Gaza. His release has been called a gesture of goodwill by Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, who is leading the American involvement in the ceasefire negotiations. And U.S. President Donald Trump has confirmed the expected release of the Israeli-American detainee Edan Alexandar, calling it a step taken in good faith towards ending the Gaza conflict and securing the return of all detainees. In a post on Truth Social, Trump thanked mediators Egypt and Qatar for their efforts and expressed gratitude to all involved parties in facilitating the release of the 21-year-old Israeli soldier, believed to be the last surviving U.S. detainee in Gaza. On the other hand, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israel agreed only to a safe corridor for Edan Alexandar's release, not to a ceasefire, nor a detainee swap. He added that while the move offers hope for the release of 59 other detainees, military operations in Gaza will continue. Egypt and Qatar have welcomed Hamas's announcement of releasing the American detainee in Gaza, Edan Alexandar, during a phone call between Egypt's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Badr Abdulati, and his Qatari counterpart, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani. Both officials welcomed the announcement, stressing that it is an encouraging sign to return to the negotiating table. They added that this could be a boost to the mediation efforts and a step towards achieving comprehensive, just, and sustainable peace in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, we are monitoring and watching from the Reem military base, southern Israel, the anticipated release of Edan Alexandar, the 21-year-old Israeli soldier holding U.S. citizenship, a decision made by Hamas to release him under no conditions. We will be following and covering these events and developments here on Qnews. Away.
And we're still covering the latest developments in Gaza after the recent release of the Israeli-American detainee Edan Alexandar, as international efforts to negotiate a ceasefire have intensified. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has confirmed the expected release of Israeli-American detainee Edan Alexandar, calling it a step taken in good faith towards ending the Gaza conflict and securing the return of all the detainees. In a Truth Social post, Trump thanked mediators Egypt and Qatar for their efforts and expressed gratitude to all involved in facilitating the release of the 21-year-old Israeli soldier, believed to be the last surviving U.S. detainee in Gaza. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israel agreed only to a safe corridor for Edan Alexandar's release, not to a ceasefire or detainee swap. He added that while the move offers hope for the release of 59 other detainees, military operations in Gaza will continue. Egypt and Qatar have welcomed Hamas's announcement of releasing the American detainee in Gaza, Edan Alexandar, during a phone call between Egypt's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Badr Abdel-Ati, and his Qatari counterpart, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani. Both officials welcomed the announcement, stressing that it is an encouraging sign to return to the negotiating table. They added that this could be a boost to the mediation efforts and a step towards achieving comprehensive, just, and sustainable peace in the region. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also thanked U.S. President Trump for helping secure the release of American-Israeli detainee Edan Alexandar. In a statement, Netanyahu expressed gratitude for Trump's role in negotiations, reaffirming Israel's stance on dealing with Hamas under fire. Trump pledged continued support for Israel and closer cooperation with Netanyahu. And delving more into the recent developments, join us from Cairo is Mr. Khalid Dawood, managing editor of Al Ahram Weekly. Welcome, Mr. Dawood, and let me start by asking you now, Hamas urged Trump to continue his efforts to end Israel's brutal war on Gaza. As the world awaits Trump's visit to the Middle East, what can he do in this matter during his visit to ensure the release of the remaining detainees while ending at the same time the genocidal war on Gaza?
Well, thanks for having me. Obviously, there are lots of intense efforts that are happening behind the scenes and in public in order to give Trump the opportunity to announce some breakthrough leading to the end of the ongoing genocide war Israel has been launching against the Palestinian people in Gaza for 19 months so far. As you know, just a few minutes ago, the Israeli-American hostage, Alexander Edan, has been handed to the Red Cross, and probably in a few minutes he'll be back in Israel. That Hamas has released without any return as a kind of a goodwill gesture towards the U.S. president in person. There were no Palestinian prisoners released in return, even though Alexander Edan, of course, is a dual American-Israeli citizen, and he was serving at the Israeli army at the time he was taken as a prisoner to Gaza. So obviously Hamas from President Trump himself just yesterday, he wrote on his own Twitter account or X account that he hopes that the release of Alexander would be one of the final steps towards ending this brutal war. But of course, everybody is not sure about the attitude and the tricks and the attempts that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would carry out in order to extend that war, even though there's some obvious effort and need by the American president during his tour of the region starting tomorrow, that there is some announcement that would back up all the business deals that he's going to announce, but there is still very much of a need for an announcement that the release of the American Israeli hostage today will be the first step towards at least reopening the Gaza borders, allowing the flood of humanitarian aid through a certain arrangement to the Gaza people, especially amid reports of a spread famine. And at the same time, as probably you've reported, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, despite all his kind of provocative statements that the war will continue and all the kind of stuff, he's sending an Israeli delegation to Qatar tomorrow. So obviously something is cooking. The U.S. President Donald Trump, personal envoy to the Middle East, Mr. Steve Witkoff, is in Israel. He's been briefing Netanyahu and the Israeli cabinet members on some sort of an American proposal to help towards restoring the ceasefire. So lots of intense movements, and something probably will come out throughout the coming 3 days during Trump's tour of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE.
Well, in accordance with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's statement that the recent release of Edan Alexandar is expected to lead to negotiations on a truce, what could this tell about the future ceasefire negotiations? And does it actually signal genuine momentum towards permanent peace?
Well, since even the first truce deal was reached in mid-January, the issue that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly tried to avoid is to commit himself to ending the war in Gaza. I mean, over the past 19 months, he's been claiming all the time that the war will go on, not just to release the hostages. That's a secondary goal. The prime goal is to defeat Hamas, destroy Hamas, force its leaders to leave, to disarm, all that kind of slogans. And obviously, the American administration has given the Israeli Prime Minister some green light over the past 2 months since the truce deal collapsed to carry out some of the worst killings we've seen in Gaza since the war started. But there is this sense, not just among the Americans, but probably in the entire world, including European countries and, of course, Arab countries, that this war has become senseless. It's become not going to lead anywhere close to what the Israeli Prime Minister has been repeatedly claiming about total victory and total defeat of Hamas. Again, on the contrary, on the past few days after Israel went deeply into Gaza, we've seen counterattacks by Hamas, the Israeli soldiers getting killed by resistance operations. So obviously the American administration has reached some sort of a conclusion that this war has to come to an end because it's leading nowhere, and probably it conflicts with other declared goals by the American president, that he wants to reach a deal with Iran, that he reached the deal with the Yemenis, the Houthis in Yemen, to end the attacks against the ships in the Red Sea, and he's working on a deal to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. So, I mean, obviously, Mr. Netanyahu is probably among the last remaining, parties. Of course, he's the most influential in this, but he is among the last parties to continue insisting that military action will produce results that he did not manage to achieve over the past 19 months.
So what role did the United States, particularly the Trump administration, play in facilitating the recent release, and how does it impact U.S. influence in the region?
Well, it's a major turn, a new official U.S. policy to hold direct talks with Hamas, an organization that up until today is dubbed as a terrorist organization by the U.S. government and the U.S. State Department. But obviously it reflects the personality of Trump. The same applies to the Houthis in Yemen. They're also described as a terrorist organization by the Americans, but at the same time, this did not prevent direct negotiations that led to this recent sudden pause of the American war against Yemen. So obviously, the U.S. role is very influential. I mean, there's no question that the current U.S. President Donald Trump is not former U.S. President Biden, that Mr. Netanyahu managed to, kind of procrastinate with and drag the war on during his presidency because he knew that Biden was facing elections and he was afraid of putting too much pressure in Israel. Now the party that he hoped for, Trump, is in office. He thought that he's going to support his plans for a war against Iran, redrawing a map of the Middle East. But right now, according to all the signs we're seeing, that they do not read from the same page. It was a surprise for Netanyahu that the United States conducting direct negotiations with Iran, that the war stopped suddenly. I mean, all those, and even the direct talks with Hamas, these are not definitely good signs for Mr. Netanyahu, despite whatever public statements that he makes. The challenge in the coming few days is whether the Trump administration will again manage to pressure Netanyahu to accept a renewed truce that would not result only on a partial agreement with clear commitments to ending the war. That's the biggest stumbling block that has basically led to the collapse of all the previous negotiations. Netanyahu does not want to end the war. Hamas does not just issue to want to be limited to exchange of prisoners. It wants Israeli withdrawal, end of war, and release of Palestinian prisoners. But that's what we're going to see during Trump's the current visit to the region, whether Witkoff, his envoy to the Middle East, is going to be able to, again, to convince Netanyahu to accept some sort of renewed truce and a commitment to end the war. That's the key sticking point.
So could the release of Edan Alexandar serve as a precedent or catalyst, if we may say, for further detainee exchanges or humanitarian agreements between the conflicting parties?
Well, again, obviously, this is, as Hamas stated, and as the issue is being carried out, this is a goodwill gesture between Hamas and the United States and President Trump personally, as a matter of fact. So, as you've seen, no Palestinian prisoners have been released in return. And of course, this puts a tremendous pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister due to the internal pressure by the families of the remaining living hostages, at least 24, some say 21, who remain alive, that you only must be an American in order to get to be released. And that Netanyahu and actually some of his extremist ministers, such as Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, has said that the most important goal of this war is to defeat Hamas and not to release the hostages. So the release of Alexander will definitely increase domestic internal pressure inside Israel. Demonstrations that we are seeing will certainly become bigger, pressing Netanyahu to stop this crazy war, because it is very obvious it will not lead to the release of the hostages. In that, if that's the purpose of the war, it actually will lead to the deaths of those hostages, because if the Israeli army came close to any of the hideouts that happened before, the hostages will be killed. So, I mean, basically, this war has ran for so long, caused so much damage to the region and to the world, and probably if Mr. Trump gets his way through, maybe we can see another renewed truce. But I think that the minimum would be an announcement of the re-entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza. We've already been reading lots of reports of an American plan to distribute aid within Gaza under an independent kind of body or administration, not related to Hamas, not related to the Palestinian Authority. So I think that the minimum we'll hear, and that would not be enough, to be honest, is a resumption of the entry of aid into Gaza, because what the Palestinian people need, what the region needs, what the world needs, is to end for this, crazy genocide that's taking place against the Palestinian people, killing mainly innocent citizens.
Mr. Dawood, how might this development influence future U.S. policy and diplomatic efforts aimed at resolving the Gaza conflict?
Well, I mean, again, it sounds like a package. It's either that. Aywa? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you, sir. Please go on.
I'm sorry, I was like, there was some kind of an interruption.
It's okay. Please go on.
So I'm just saying that certainly the Trump administration will be working on an entire package for the region, and not just in relation to the Gaza conflict. Mr. Trump says that he's a man of business deals. He's coming to the Gulf nations, to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, to the United Arab Emirates, to make some important business deals that would bring in at least $1 trillion into the U.S. economy. If this region remains in turmoil with the wars that Mr. Netanyahu is launching against the Palestinians in Gaza, against Lebanon, against Syria, without any restraint, this will definitely not lead to stability in the region, and we'll continue to see renewed wars and conflicts, and that definitely will not serve the regional interests or the American interests. Mm-hmm. So if we're going to take Mr. Trump at his word that he wants to become a peacemaker, he certainly needs to give priority to ending the war in Gaza.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, that was Mr. Khalid Dawood, managing editor of Al Ahram Weekly. Thank you very much for joining us here on Q News. And as we can see, ladies and gentlemen, we can see live footage from Ra'im military base, where preparations are underway at the Israeli military base for detainee Edan Alexandar's arrival. Now, Hamas has announced Alexandar's release following U.S. communications and mediator efforts aimed at securing a ceasefire and facilitating aid delivery to Gaza. Hamas emphasized that responsible negotiations lead to the release of prisoners, while continued aggression only prolongs suffering and death. The group also expressed its readiness to begin ceasefire talks, withdraw occupation forces, end the blockade, and exchange prisoners. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump said that the last U.S.-Israeli citizen held by Hamas, Edan Alexandar, is expected to be released in about 2 hours. Speaking at a press conference, Trump expressed joy at the news, saying that Alexandar is coming home to his parents, and added that he thought he was dead. Hamas is set to release Edan Alexandar, the 21-year-old Israeli soldier with U.S. citizenship, as part of ongoing efforts to secure a permanent ceasefire with Israel. The group also said that it has been in contact with the U.S. administration in recent days and described the release as part of broader steps to open crossings and allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. Alexandar is believed to be the last surviving American detainee in Gaza. His release has been called a gesture of goodwill by Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, who is leading American involvement in the ceasefire negotiations. And joining us now from Cairo, the journalist Ihab Omar for further analysis of the recent developments in Gaza. Welcome to Q News. Mr. Omar, how do you view the recent release of the Israeli-American detainee Edan Alexandar, and how could this facilitate further efforts in reaching a permanent ceasefire in Gaza?
Greetings to you, and thanks for having me. Such a bold step by you comes coincide with the expected visit by you as President Donald Trump to Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is trying to make a breakthrough compared to the previous administration by achieving a comprehensive understanding regarding the Palestinian cause. And this one, for the first time, assigned the U.S. envoy to the Middle East, would go to engage with such talks as the first U.S. administration to announce publicly engaging with direct talks with Hamas. So Trump is achieving an unprecedented equation related to the ceasefire in Gaza and in reaching a long-term truce. Some were talking about for 15 years, and in the meantime, Trump is trying to seal all of the problems in the Middle East in order to be free in tackling issues within USA, along with the foreign policy with China. As there's some sort of outrage in the American public of opinion as Trump did not fulfill his vows regarding the economy in the USA. And also to Iran's dossier. All these reasons might be the main causes of the public disagreement between Trump and Netanyahu, but I think we should not hope for more to come, or rather to elevate the ceiling of our expectations. And ultimately, Israel is the US, or the 51st US state. So, for the interest of US to have an agreement with the Arabs in the account of Israel, but Netanyahu's problem upon the cessation of the war, so he's going to be trialed and to go out of the political landscape, and wouldn't be nominated to the upcoming elections. So the disagreement is not only in the favor of Israel, but for his own interest.
So in what ways could this event impact the humanitarian situation in Gaza, including the opening of crossings and delivery of aid?
Truly, Israel has started to announce to open the crossing soon and to deliver the humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. And this announcement denies all the calls, the unknown calls through the social media platform that Egypt, the one that closes the crossing, but the crossings are blockaded and locked by the Israeli occupation forces. There is a glimpse of hope for the Palestinian people through the flow of the humanitarian aid once again following such a deal. And Egypt is fully prepared since the first day of a fleet of humanitarian aid in order to deliver in the Gaza Strip, not only to specific areas, but Egypt is intending to deliver the aid to the far north of the Gaza Strip, in order for each Palestinian to have such aids as they deserve.
I'd like to thank Mr. Ihab Omar, journalist, for the valuable insights. And ladies and gentlemen, we are still with you, providing coverage as we await the arrival of Israeli-American detainee Edan Alexandar to the Ra'im military base as part of the exchange deal concluded between Hamas and Israel, with mediation by Qatar and Egypt. We're still with you, providing you live coverage, and as we can see now on the screen, we can see Ra'im military base, where the families and people are gathering to await the exchange deal to be implemented.
We continue on with our special coverage where Hamas has released Israeli-American detainee Edan Alexandar, marking a potential turning point in the ongoing conflict. The move could pave the way for renewed ceasefire talks in the war-torn Gaza Strip. This is the special coverage here on Qnews, where we're examine the implications of the latest developments when it comes to this release and what it means for the region's future. Hamas again has announced the release of Israeli-American detainee Edan Alexandar following communications with the US and ongoing mediator efforts to reach a ceasefire and allow aid into Gaza. The group stated that responsible negotiations can lead to further prisoners' releases, while continued aggressions only deepen suffering. Hamas also declared readiness to enter immediate talks for a comprehensive ceasefire, Israeli troop withdrawal, and an end to the blockade, as well as further prisoner exchange. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has thanked the US President Donald Trump for helping to secure the release of the American-Israeli detainee Edan Alexandar. In a statement, Netanyahu expressed gratitude for Trump's role in negotiations, reaffirming Israel's stance in dealing with Hamas under fire. Trump pledged continued support for Israel and closer cooperation with Netanyahu.
מתו, שירחמו נגדנו שוב פעם. אוקיי? לא, הכל טוב.
Israeli forces have arrested 530 Palestinians in the West Bank last month, including at least 60 children and 18 women. According to the Palestinian prisoner group, the arrests primarily targeted Tulkarm and Jenin. There were reports of severe abuse during the detentions. Since the start of Israel's war in Gaza, Egypt and Qatar have welcomed Hamas's announcement of the release of the American detainee in Gaza, Edan Alexandar. During a phone call between Egypt's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Badr Abdulati, and his Qatari counterpart, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, both officials welcomed the announcement, stressing that it is an encouraging sign to return to the negotiating table. They added that this would be a boost to the mediation efforts and a step towards achieving comprehensive, just, and sustainable peace in the region. To help us analyze the current unfolding situation, we're joined from Cairo by the editor-in-chief of Al-Ahram newspaper, Mohammed Izzeddin. Welcome, sir, to Qnews. Sir, firstly, let's start off by asking, can the recent detainee release be seen as a sign of a softening position on either side?
Thanks for having me. Certainly, it is a good step and gesture that represents a breakthrough on the path of negotiation that was frozen by the Israeli occupation forces and their wishes of the resumption of the military actions. There was an image before the world that the Palestinian resistance that disrupted the negotiation. So the American breakthrough by America directly with the Palestinian resistance, Hamas, proved that there is a gesture of goodwill by the Palestinian resistance. And the success of Al-Doha negotiation by the presence of the Egyptian and Qatari mediators, in addition to Witkoff, the American envoy to the Middle East, that proves that whoever disrupting the negotiation is the Israeli side, not the Palestinian resistance.
So, sir, do you think that the U.S. election season that's coming up is the reason or the influence for the direction towards a ceasefire talk? Because we're seeing, as you've said, sir, that the ceasefire negotiations seem to be picking up pace at the current moment, given the release of this American Israeli.
Also, there is a good step for delivering the humanitarian to the Gaza Strip, not compared to previously, particularly in the mechanism of distributing the aid. But there are preparations by the Egyptian side. If there is an agreement took place with regard to the delivering the humanitarian aid once again, I think that would help a lot in stopping the deterioration in the health sector in Gaza Strip, along with the famine suffered by the Palestinian people. In addition to the collective genocide practiced by the Israeli forces, I think yes, there is a development and progress of the ceasefire negotiations, and that might lead to start delivering the humanitarian aids once again, and also to pave the way to the resumption of the negotiation in the future with respect to the detainees and prisoner exchange, and to start the Egyptian plan of reconstruction in Gaza agreed upon by all Arabs in the League of Arab States, and therefore will be having a breakthrough politically alongside with the humanitarian side.
Well, sir, like you've said there, that there may be a breakthrough if the humanitarian aid is able to enter into Gaza. Do you believe that the Americans right now have the will to push through the humanitarian plan allowing aid to enter into Gaza, despite the possible rift between them and the Israelis?
True. It seems that there is a gesture of disagreement and exchange of accusations between the Israelis and the Americans. The U.S. has noticed, and according to the report by the National Security of America, that are related to affect the image of U.S. If we have noticed that the U.S. administration, along with Trump's statement, will find that he started his tenure and term by threatening the Palestinian resistant and open the gates of hell on Gaza Strip. These developments and disagreements led to that President Trump lately had stated that the humanitarian situation is catastrophic, i.e., there is great differences and discrepancies between the two sides in as the United States along is not only the public opinion or the American politician, but the international community started to avoid the U.S. thoroughly as they are a peace sponsor, and considering that if Israel as a part of US, as Israel is trying to sell this idea, i.e., that US took steps backward away of the Israeli public opinion, particularly in the Middle East, as happened with the National Security Counselor by threatening Iran, and this would damage the U.S. image. In addition to violate several agreements with the U.S. along with its interest in the region. There is a very U.S. resolution with respect to the Middle East, and I think it is a very good gesture, even though the Israeli side do not like of this distance between the two sides with respect to the military and political matters in the Middle East.
Also, now you've said that there is a rift between the Americans and the Israelis when it comes to, long-term truce, and that the Americans, or at least Donald Trump, wants to appear as the peacemaker here. But what are the main obstacles preventing long-term truce between the Israelis and Hamas right now?
True. The US president is trying to present the passive image that shown before the whole world, particularly in the Middle East, not only with respect to the trade war, but the foreign policy of the US, even with respect to launching attacks against Yemen, that he temporarily sit back. In addition to the ill image or the bad guy in the Middle East, which are the Palestinian resistance, and this narrative clearly untrue. And there are some sort of gestures or goodwill gestures, and also the matter is related to the upcoming visit by President Trump, specifically to the three Gulf Arab countries. They consider it is in a very economic gain in order to bolstering the American economy, the American influence, along with the American corporations in the Middle East, particularly in the Gulf. In addition, the great Arab refusal of the Palestinian schemes in displacement of the Palestinian, and the steadfast of the Egyptian stance that stood before displacement of the Palestinian out of the land. In addition, to settle the Palestinian cause as the main condition, even if there will be some sort of normalization with the Israelis officially or economically. But with respect to the US stance, I think that has been improved a lot. And I think following the U.S. visit or the U.S. President visit to the Gulf, that will create other impression that boost the Arabic stance regarding the Palestinian cause, specifically the necessity of a ceasefire and delivering and to the Arab plan for the reconstruction Gaza.
Also, now we know that President Donald Trump is currently on his way to a tour in the Gulf states. Do you believe that it is possible that maybe Trump, during this tour, will announce a ceasefire or a final ceasefire in Gaza from the Gulf states?
I think there will be positive statement as such. But to have some sort of a final ceasefire, this cannot be confirmed, particularly with the adamant position of Israel and the flimsy features of handing over of the American-Israeli detainee without any joyful features. That proves that the Israelis aren't happy with this matter, and I think that will be having some sort of positive statement with regard to Gaza and Palestine. Particularly, the three countries are very keen to have internal consensus and along with the steadfast stance of Egypt in addition to the other Arab countries. Furthermore, this matter would pave the way to the possibility of relationship between Israel with the Gulf areas, Arab, and this would take a great size of concern by the U.S. administration along with the moderate side of the Israeli side. With respect to the ceasefire, we hope to take place, and even if delivering humanitarian aid according to new conditions, along with the help with the World Humanitarian Organization, but most importantly, to deliver the humanitarian aid. And I think in the upcoming hours would foresee that regarding the approaching visit of President Donald Trump to Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Qatar and UAE.
Well, sir, I mean, like you said, that Netanyahu and his hardline cabinet will not be happy with a permanent ceasefire there. Now, do you believe that he will likely, and his cabinet, not agree to a permanent ceasefire? And if so, can international pressure force them into this, specifically U.S. pressure?
In the beginning, Israel isn't submitting to international pressure but to the USA. All the international pressure meets no response by Israel, but compared to the American pressures, reluctantly Israel would respond to. For the hardliner part or side cabinet aren't happy with such an idea. But with respect to the pressure by US that would assist delivering humanitarian aid, certainly Israel isn't going to be happy with in reaching a permanent ceasefire. But with respect to delivering the humanitarian aid, I think Israel would respond to the American pressure along with the Arab mediators backed by the Arab countries to deliver humanitarian aid and to start a new phase of a ceasefire, even if it is a temporary, that might lead to other negotiations to change or to transform this ceasefire to a permanent ceasefire for many years and to start to execute the Egyptian plan of reconstruction Gaza approved and endorsed by the League of Arab States.
Well, sir, now Hamas is going to release, or has released, the American-Israeli detainee Edan Alexandar. Now, this gesture of good faith, it has won them quite a lot with the US, especially with Trump announcing that this is such a big win, that the American has been released and so forth. Do you think that this action may help in intensifying the US's role when it comes to brokering a ceasefire?
Yes, Hamas approval through direct negotiation, the presence of have a very positive impact. Firstly, on the situation in Gaza. Secondly, to display the positive gesture by Hamas that they are very prepared, particularly following the latest statement, that they are very prepared for the ceasefire, to start a new negotiation, to deliver the rest of the detainees along with the dead of the Israeli captives in Gaza. Also, its announcement that they are very open to govern Gaza independently, which is a very important statement that came in the last 24 hours, as meaning that Hamas has abandoned governing Gaza, announcing this before the American negotiator. That would open the hope, or the door of hope, to resume the negotiation with respect to Gaza in the future and in reaching a permanent ceasefire in the upcoming period. I think it's the rapprochement or the agreement between the negotiator by the presence of the Egyptian Qatari brokers were very useful regarding the ceasefire, and we hope to see this to continue, despite my expectation on Israel attempts to disrupt in reaching a permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian territories in general.
Okay, from Cairo, that was the editor-in-chief of Al Ahram newspaper, Mohammed Azzeddin. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us from Qnews. Moving on, Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid has criticized Prime Minister Netanyahu, claiming the US is fed up with his leadership. In a post on X, Lapid expressed support for the release of all detainees, including Edan Alexandar, but pointed out that the remaining captives are Israeli citizens and are not released due to the government's failure to strike a deal. And with that, Hamas has released the Israeli-American detainee Edan Alexandar, a move that could signal a potential turning point in the ongoing conflict. This release may open the door to renewed ceasefire talks in the war-torn Gaza Strip. And this brings us to the end of our transmission for the day. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching.